Hello, good evening. I hope you have your sherry glasses ready in front of you. I have got mine all poured out and the room is beginning to smell delicious. I know we have somebody, at least one, viewing in from the United States and a lot more friends from across the UK and maybe in Europe too. So wherever you are, please make yourself known in the chat window. And I hope to keep up a dialogue with you as we go along. Well, we're here to talk about Montilla-Moriles and sherry. We're basically here to talk about the great historic wines of Andalusia, but actually they're wines we think really strongly for the 21st century. There are styles here amongst this lovely selection we have this evening, something for everyone, a style for every lifestyle. So let's get going and see where this takes us. What I need to do first is, that's it, press the screen. So it's a whistle-stop journey. We've got an hour together, so I've got quite a bit to get through. So first of all, we're talking about two grape varieties. We may have 6 different wines in front of us, but there's just 2 grape varieties. On the left, on a photo from the Consejo Regulador site, the sherry.wine, which is a very good source of information for sherry, we've got Palomino. Palomino makes, of these wines, it makes 1, 2, 3, 4 of these wines. So 5 rather, let's think about it, no 4. So as we go through, you'll find out which ones they are. So it shows you that it can make wines in every style. Pedro Jimenez equally can make wines in every style. We've got 2 wines here, which couldn't be more different. Picture here, thank you, from Montilla-Morileswines.com, lovely source of information too. We're going to talk a little bit about food, because I think the one thing about having a tasting of these wines is they really make you want to match them with food, and they all taste better with the food. Then we're going to have a map, because, well, you have to have a map. We're going to have, therefore, a manzanilla from Sanlúcar de Barrameda, and we're going to have another one. So that's a quite interesting contrast and chat about one small area with 2 different wines. We're going to have a fino, which is well, you'll see what it's like. It's a dry wine from Montilla-Moriles. And we're going to have 2 different styles of wine from Jerez, which are weightier styles. And then finally, a real, how can I say, a real glamour puss. It's a really, really sweet wine from Montilla-Moriles. And if you have it in your glass already poured, you can see that it's going to be different. And then I'm going to say quickly something about how to serve and enjoy your wines. And then if you haven't you're welcome to put questions into chat, but otherwise I'm very happy to answer them afterwards. So let's go the other way. And here we are. This is food. I really want to start with food, because sherry to me means food, and Montilla-Moriles the same. There's a lovely saying in, and I've got it here on a card, there's a lovely saying here that they use in this parts with, if it swims, use fino or manzanilla styles. If it flies, give it Amontillado or Palo Cortado. And if it runs, give it Oloroso. So that's worth remembering. Swims, fino manzanilla, flies, Amontillado and Palo Cortado, and runs, Oloroso. So we're starting on the top left-hand corner actually with vegetables, which is maybe not either swimming or running, but this, I think, I've quite a few of these pictures I've taken from a good friend, Maria Jose Sevilla, who's a great expert on Spanish food, and her Instagram feed has wonderful recipes every day. And she's put these mushrooms together, and you can see a lovely garlicky mix. And I probably would have, I might have an older fino or possibly a lighter Amontillado with this. Then if we go up to this picture, it's one of my own snaps of what looks like to me like, I now can't recollect what it was, but it was a picture I took in Sanlúcar. Looks like an older manzanilla, and then with fried fish. Well, you have to have, if it swims, then it's fino or manzanilla. Moving on, we have some rice. And rice can actually take even rice with shellfish can take something weightier. It can take an Amontillado. Then we move on to a chocolate cake. chocolate cake. That's where our PX comes in, without doubt. Moving down to the right-hand corner, we've now got the asparagus, and I think the asparagus could take either a fino or a Amontillado a little richer. That's up to you. Then we come to the oxtail. This is such a classic dish with this very dense, rich, succulent sauce and the potatoes. We're absolutely back on a winter evening in Jerez, or indeed Montilla. And this definitely is an Oloroso. Then we have some more flavoursome mushrooms. And then finally, this is very interesting, a recipe of Maria Jose's, which is chicken roasted with piñones, with pine kernels and raisins, and then basted with flaming Oloroso. Terrific dish. So there's all kinds of things you could do, but I think I haven't begun to explore all of them. But I hope that if you have something on the table with you, you've also got, I know actually there's one couple here viewing who've got a whole Spanish meal with them. So that's, I think, the way to do this. So let's see what's doing next. Well, here's a map. As I said, you have to have a map. We'll start here in Jerez, capital city, Jerez la Frontera, and we can see the Bay of Cadiz here. Well, we don't have to talk about Sir Walter Raleigh or anything like that, I don't think. But what's important about this is that there are all these growing regions, but there's little pink area is Manzanilla de Sanlúcar. So it's quite a small area. But what I really wanted to point out was that by, my mouse has disappeared, there it is. You can see the Guadalquivir River, the great river of gold. And in the days of Christopher Columbus, that's where the explorers then were able to sail up to Seville and take their gold and all their discoveries. And it was quite a place. So now the river has filled in a little bit, doesn't happen. But on the other side of the river, here is a very, very famous nature reserve, Cotodoñana. Now, if we move to the yellow section, we're in Montilla-Moriles, and it's inland, and it's the soils are very similar. I'm going to talk about the soils, and it's certainly, and you can see the influence is more Mediterranean rather than coming from the Atlantic Ocean. And it gets hot here. So there's a place here called Écija, which is known as the frying pan of Spain, because it is exceptionally hot. And then to the north, just outside the boundaries of the DO, Cordoba, a terrific city to visit. So let's start with our first wine. I haven't introduced it yet, but I think you should just have it in your glass. There's nothing textbook about this tasting. I just want you to be enjoying these things. So as you have the wine in your glass, as with each one of these wines, look at them first, appreciate the color, the clarity, the way they glint in the glass, and then smell them. There's an awful lot about these wines on this table, which are all about smelling them before you even put them in your mouth. Now, normally, if we were together at a party, we would, or in a bar, we'd probably just be drinking them. But frankly, it's that's what takes me back to the holiday that we all need in Andalusia. So the point about Sanlúcar is, now this is a great picture on the left. It shows you that they do horse races across the sand, especially at bank holiday. And there is one very famous member of a very famous family, the Hidalgo family, who is also manages to be a jockey. I don't know how he keeps his weight down, but he does. Then on the other side, you can see the nature reserve. And here in the middle, there's a little old blue boat, which goes backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And there's one over here too. And if you sit on this side in a bar on the waterfront, the Bajo de Guia, you'll see the boats coming forward. So what are the influences? There's the river itself, the Atlantic Ocean. There are salt marshes here, very historic. It's humid, undoubtedly it's humid, you feel it. And then the town comes in two levels. It's on the ground, there is a sea level and almost below sea level. And then there's an upper area too. So the wines can be different depending on the levels. These are really exceptional conditions for the growth of flor. So now, quick run through on flor while you're enjoying that first wine. And what we have here is a very typical barrel. And maybe it looks slightly unappealing. It's from the sherry website, but it tells you exactly like it is. You have a butt, which is typically 600 litres. It's nothing about new oak or anything. It's this dark old oak container. They have the very old ones, and you don't fill it up to the top. So you have 500 litres worth, thereabouts, of liquid inside. As you know, that wine is made by alcoholic fermentation. So you have the yeast act on the sugars in the must, and that fermentation creates an alcoholic drink, whether it's beer or wine. And so what we have here, though, are other yeasts which then come in, and they act on the oxygen that's around. They act on the material that's inside the barrel. They generally consume everything else in the environment, which changes the character of the wine. So normally, if you cut a banana, it gets exposed to the oxygen and goes brown. But with this remarkable layer of flor, then it just changes the character of the wine. It eats up the sugar, it eats up the glycerine, eats up the oxygen. So you have something that's profoundly dry. So let's move on, and I will be quite clear. And we've had one question about which wine you should start with. Frankly, I don't mind, but I think let's start with the one that is called Lagita. So it's this one, if you happen to have it, this charming bottle. I think the bodegas have been great in giving us these very representative bottles. So Lagita is, as we'll discover, from the lower part of San Luca. And I must tell you the story of the string. So you have this little bit of string here, and it's because when people used to go up to the original producer of this, they used to say, you know, can I have a glass? And he'd say, have you got any cash? And the word he'd use for cash is guita. But guita also means a guitar string. So in time, the word guita and this winery became linked up. So it's became La Guita. And ever since, they still have this piece of string, which is delightful. So that's La Guita. So here you can see on the left-hand side the bodega, one of the bodegas. It's a big business, and you can see that this photograph is slightly oddly taken, and that's basically because these are very narrow streets. You can't get far enough away to do an upright photograph. But that's bodega with its typically high windows that you know when you're walking around the streets. If you've got one of these large warehouses with high windows, that's a bodega. And then here we have the bottle, and it tells you that if you can see that at the top of the barrel, it says fourth. So it's the fourth Criadera, which means there's every time the sherry is moved through its constant system of aging, it goes from one set of barrels down to another, down to another. And you can see also that in this Criadera, if you look at the bottom, there are 1,197 barrels. So there's quite a lot of them. So we'll see now. Now, I'm very happy to say that we couldn't get to, on this particular outing, we couldn't get to meet the winemakers or get into the wineries, but we have a treat for you in the fact that we've been able to get the winemakers, as it were, to come to us. So when I turn over to the next slide, we will have we'll meet Victoria Frutos, who's one of the winemakers. And before I turn over, I just wanted to see if you can see over what is to you my left shoulder. And over my left shoulder, I've got propped up on the wall, which is painted blue, I've got it's that shoulder, yeah. You can see I've got two Venencias, and they're the thing that you use for taking out the sherry from the barrel. And we're going to see two different ways of doing this, or two different ones. So here we are in San Luca. So very typically, traditionally, they use bamboo ones. So later we'll see somebody using one of those, but Victoria is using the much more common one here, and we'll just see that in a minute. Now I've had a comment. Eric is eating anchovies and olive oil. Very good choice. I haven't got any here. Eric, you're making me hungry. And the arrows on the barrel just mean that it shows you in which direction the rest of the row goes. We'll see more of them as you go, and you'll see that they're pointing in different directions. So you have a picture of one that's at the end of a barrel, and in fact you'll see when we turn over that Victoria is standing in front of a terrifically long rows of sherry. They've got 16,000 butts there. It's a lot of sherry. So and just Lagita. So let's turn over, and maybe you can see a little bit more of what there is. So here's Victoria, and she's got in her glass what we have here. Now let's, just before she talks, let's look at it. It says Palomino, 100%, and the grapes come specifically from one very good vineyard, and they have about 4 years aging under floor. And here I've got, this is the most up-to-date that I have in terms of stockists and prices. So if you're interested in stockists and prices, take a note of this. But above all, go to the website, get in touch with them if you have questions. So it's, well, let's see what Victoria says, and then we can talk about it.
Hello, I am Victoria Frutos, winemaker at Grupo Esteve, and I would like to show you my wine. This is Lagita, a classic manzanilla which comes from Pago de Miraflores, a coastal vineyard facing the Atlantic Ocean in the growing area of Sanlúcar. The local terroir and 4.5 years of biological aging under floor will give this wine a delicious salinity and mineral character. A wonderful wine to enjoy chilled with your smoked salmon. Salud.
Yeah.
Great. Well, you can see, I hope somebody here, I haven't got any smoked salmon, but somebody has smoked salmon. So why would you have smoked salmon with that? Because it has this terrifically lovely pungency in the mouth. It feels like it's going to give you that sprinkle of lemon juice on top. It's not lemon juice. That's not what you get from sherry, but it has a wonderfully savory, salty character, which would be just the match for that kind of thing. Though indeed for, as Eric suggested, sushi as well. So you'll see she has her Valencia in her hand, and then you'll see that there's a very long, four very long rows of barrels. There are many more than those, and behind her, just behind her head, I think you can see that one says it's the first Criadera. So you can follow the numbers, and then next to it you can see that this is obviously a public part of the winery, because it's got people have signed the barrels, and it's a tradition, if you go to many areas, to sign the barrels in white chalk. And it's and people who are on this call who have never done it. I mean, it always seems like it's super easy. I tell you, it's not. The trouble I've had signing those barrels it's not easy, but that's a great tradition, and a fun thing to do is you can walk around and see who's been there in a historic cellar. So yes, a comment about using a Venencia. I have Venencias, and I have tried to use them, and it's something that they like to get you to do in cellars when you visit, but it goes everywhere. It can be done. Best thing to do is to stand in the bath or do it in the garden or something, but I think you really have to throw yourself into it with confidence. So I hope you now get the feeling of Lagita, Sanlúcar to its heart. There's no wine like it. You smell that and you know where you are. Now here's another one from Sanlúcar. Let's get ourselves going forward. Here we are. So this is a wine, another very famous wine. These two are very well known in of the San Lucar Manzanillas, and it's a company called Barbadillo. And I had to have the picture of the red door because that's a very, very typical thing. And then going from the hot street in through the red door to the Solear bodega. And I have to confess that I have an interest here. I was once made a Dama de Solear in a lovely honorific ceremony, so I always have a warm feeling to Solear. So now we're going to have an introduction to Solear. And first of all, I want to introduce the lady at the top, Montse Molina. She wasn't able to do the tape, and she's the head winemaker of a really enormous business which runs from the best-selling white wine in Spain to all sorts of other very fine sherries. She has a great technical skill and very, very interesting person. And she's somebody certainly to get to know. So we'll see what Tim has to say. I think what's very interesting about this is also made with Palomino, very similar to the previous wine. What makes it different is the place and the place of aging and how they manage it. So here, what they've done is they age it for a bit longer. This is more than 6 years aging. But during its life, the wine is moved from barrel to barrel, slowly through different bodegas. So it goes into 4 different buildings. Each bodega is a building, and it goes into 4 different buildings. And the last one it enters is this one that Tim is standing in, I think, or maybe it's not, he'll tell us. But the last one it goes into is facing the sea facing wall. So that's one where, although they're up on the hill where the breezes come up, they're actually facing towards the sea. So it's the most exposed to the sea. And what they're looking for here with these wines in this part of the world is that saline character. Is there salt in Manzanilla from the sea breezes? No, probably not, but there is something tempting. So let's see what Tim has to say.
Hello, my name is Tim Holt. I work for Barbadillo on the export side, and I'm here to show you Solear Manzanilla, which we have maturing here in this cask in a maturing stage, in what we call a criadera. And here it is to show you what it looks like. And it's maturing in this amazing cathedral bodega, which we call Barbadillo.
So one thing I forgot to point out to you is that Tim, well, you saw that he was using a bamboo Valencia, but to get through, because there is a crust of floor, it's a soft crust, but there is a crust of floor covering the sherry, is he gave it a little twiddle so that he could get the Valencia cleanly through the floor and then bring it quickly and cleanly out. And that's the technique. I mean, as Kate mentioned, she'd love to learn to use a Valencia. I think that's as far as I could get, but getting it in and out of the barrel without having floor in it or too much floor is a real skill. So we have here 2 quite wines are clearly in the same family but slightly different wines, both of them wines that you'll see in the spring fairs that they have across this region, and indeed many parts of Andalusia. And this is a bit older. I think it's a personal style. This has a richness perhaps, whereas the Laguita maybe is more excitingly pungent. So it horses for courses, but it's yeah, I hope you'll learn from this that this is San Lucar without a doubt, which is why I'm not going to take you somewhere else. You saw on the map.
Hello.
No, we've gone too far. There we are. You saw on the map that we started off near the Atlantic coast with San Lucar and Jerez, and now we're moving inland for the first of our wines from Montilla-Moriles. And this is a fascinating, fascinating region. So we have soils which are very similar to the ones that you'll find in Jerez. The point about the Albarita soils, they're clay, calcium, marine fossils, they are glintingly white. You practically need sunglasses. And when you go to these regions, you have these rolling hills, and then you have this terrific soil, very absorbent, which retain the water when you've got ultra dry summers. And as I said, it's terrifically hot. So here, with this one grape variety, which in the original picture I showed you produced a white pinkish grape, you can let it get more and more raisined. As you can see, they're drying it out in the sun in the bottom picture. So you can make a dry fino, like a little like the manzanilla. You can make an amontillado. Now, we always talk about, the world talks about amontillado in Jerez as if it's the only amontillado there is. But in fact, of course, amontillado was made in the Montilla style. It's an amontillado wine. So the original Montilla, then they'll make you an Oloroso and a Palo Cortado, and then this thing at the end, I can't call it a thing, but this glorious sweet wine at the end, which is the very essence of Pedro Jimenez. So depending on when you harvest it and where your vineyards are and the choices you make, you can either make what will become our third wine, or you can make a succulent sweet wine, or somewhere in between that. And we certainly have, there's a wine here which is in this region which has got 100 points from Robert Parker. It's so I think the adaptability of this variety is super exciting. The name itself of Pedro Jimenez is said to come from a sea captain from thousands of years ago, but hundreds of years ago, but I'm not really sure that that's the case. So let's have a look at our third wine, which comes from Bodegas Alvear. It's the one that's called Fino CB. And in a minute, Fernando Alvear will explain to us what it's all about. But I wanted to show you a few things here. This cellar is very typical, could be in Jerez, could be in Montilla-Moriles. You can see there, you have the woven screens to the windows because the light is very bright at certain times of the day. You can see the soil, I was going to say soil, the ground, the point about a well-maintained cellar in this part of the world, in Jerez and in Huelva, is that you will have typically soil or sand on the ground, and then you can moisten it at any time. So if you want to, if you feel that the cellar is getting too dry and you want to raise the humidity, super important, so the barrels don't dry out, or then you can always dampen that. So that is a reason, if you're going to visit the winery, any of these wineries in nice suede shoes, don't, because you'll end up with damp sand around the edges. But you can also see, probably if you look closely, that these wines all come from the CB, which is what we're about to taste, the Fino CB. But for instance, the one in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see it says 1 of 436. And then if you look, and there's arrows going in different directions, maybe in this over here, you can see this says 1 in 1,200 something. So there's a lot of counting. It's just a non-computerized system of knowing where you are in the cellar, because it's important to say, we might think looking at this that the wine just sits there, but of course it doesn't. It gets a small amount of it gets moved into another barrel, and one. Well, let's start at the bottom. To do some bottling, you take wine out of the final finished aged wine. You take some out of the barrel, not a large amount, but you take some out, and you do it from a number of barrels, and then you need to top it up. So then you refill with some wine from the next age, and that leaves a space, and you keep on going, and that's called a saca and rocío. So your saca, you're taking it out, rocío, you're watering it over, and that's something we're going to see a little bit of later. Anyway, that sets the scene for this wine, Fino CB, which looks exactly like, well, slightly different, because it's a little bit younger than the one we had before, Soleil. We'll discover it's 5 years, but it looks effectively the same, and it smells similar. Now you must think about it. When I've finished, I think you need to spend the evening with these wines, going back to them as they warm up in the glass, considering. But this is really a Fino, but it's made from Pedro Jimenez, from this super adaptable variety. So let's turn over and see now what Fernando, who is the CEO, obviously, and still a family business, what Fernando has to say.
Hello, my name is Fernando Alvear, the CEO of Bodegas Alvear. Our winery was founded in 1729, almost 3 centuries ago, and is still handled by my family. The Fino CB is a beautiful and unique unfortified Fino made from the finest Pedro Jimenez grapes of the Sierra de Montilla and the flagship of our bodega. The brand CB comes from Carlos Villanueva, the cellar master in the 19th century who used to sign with his initials the cask containing the best wine. I hope you enjoy the wine as I do. Thank you.
That's a very speaking presentation for all sorts of reasons. I was telling you, we were talking about Criadera, so you can see that that's the first Criadera, but you can also see in the bottom right-hand corner the Solera. And although we talk about the Solera system, which is the overall name that people use for the way these styles of wines are made, in fact, the Solera is the bottom level, or it's the final layer ready for bottling, typically was found on the ground, hence the word Solera from Sol. And you can see also, the number 1733 on that first Criadera, but you can also see when they last topped it, because they put Rocío on it, and they've said that it happened on the 10th of July 2020, and that's how you do it. And using a chalk, then you can brush it out next time you've done it. So that's very helpful to see that, and they've only had to write it on one because some poor person has gone all the way down, topping and emptying and topping, emptying and topping all the way down. So that is, for me, is super interesting to see. But I think also to show that, and some conversation about what the style of this is. This is a Fino. It's got more, it's got more body to it. It doesn't have perhaps some of the hidden fruit. For instance, if you go back to something like Laguita, it has an appley character to it. It has a little bit of chamomile. It's quite a delicate thing. This has a little bit more structure to it, and it's something you would enjoy. Well, I don't know, I'd love to know what you've got on your tables, but it's something you could have with, I'd quite like it with a super interesting cheese like Conte, something like that. Of course, you can say Manchego, but you need to have a really good Manchego. There's a lot of, if I buy Manchego in the supermarket, it doesn't really taste like Manchego. I need to go to a specialist independent deli for that. So also what I'd really like to point out, because it's something that I was very confused about when I started learning about sherry, is that you can get such ripeness on Pedro Jimenez. It is a different variety, that they don't need to fortify it. So when I was first learned about Fino from Montilla-Moriles, I was told no, it's all a lie. Of course they fortify it, and everybody does. But actually, the nature of the grape variety and the place and the fact it is different from Jerez. It's not far as the crow flies, but it is different, makes a different wine, and it's quite a nice choice to make. I've just I noticed from the conversation that my Spanish, thank you, has been corrected by my colleague that indeed I use sol, but of course it's suelo means floor, and therefore soler is the cask nearest the floor, which we can see along here. So I think I want to make it clear that for this particular Fino is not fortified. It has that warmth, but it does generally come from the place, the sunshine, the reflected heat on the grapes, and but it has a savoury, nutty character, which is super interesting. So it would be good for you to go out at the weekend and get some more cherries and compare them and see how they are, because I think that this, once you start looking, it's just so exciting to compare the different styles. And Alvears, you see, is one of the really established the most established name in Montilla-Moriles. So here we are. We have the one thing I think I also want to say about these three wines is they to use the correct term, is they're biologically aged. That's to say, flor plays a part in these. So there's no fun way to describe it. Well, I was in a conversation, Instagram conversation online the other night, trying to talk about how could you communicate the joy of these wines to millennials, and they can seem complicated, but I think it's very clear. We're either dealing with younger or older wines, and they develop different, more complex characters as they get older. Then if you want to go further, and I think probably a number of us on this call maybe do want to go further, but if you want to go further, either via one company or tasting all sorts, then there are lots of opportunities. But the key thing is that we have these three wines, which are very super clear, super pale in front of us, which have been protected by flor. So unfortunately, the word they use is biological aging, which somehow doesn't sound great in English, but that's what it is. So in a minute, we're going to move to oxidative aging, which again doesn't sound very appealing either. So oxidative aging is obviously the wine has had a chance to come into gentle, slow, maturing contact with oxygen, and that's what we have with this wine. So let's come to our first wine. Oh, there we are. And that's going to take us back to Jerez. Now, these pictures they may seem, the one on the left may seem cliched, but that's how it is. So on the right, we have this glinting Albariza soil, the abundant Palomino grapes. Really look at that, abundant. And then if you've been touring the vineyards or the beaches in the day, then you come back into Jerez, and genuinely you can listen to people singing, people are out on the streets, and they're drinking sherry and beer and gin tonic, but they're drinking sherry and they're having small bites to eat, and it's sociable. And even now, I mean, I've seen photos there, people are having to be careful, but you can still do it with distancing. So I think the sherry habit is alive and well, even with distancing. So the first wine is the Williams and Humbert Oloroso. And Oloroso is a wine that never had any biological aging. Whereas if you had an Amontillado, it would have had some time as a Manzanilla Fino style before it was then exposed to oxygen. So that's what really characterizes an Amontillado. So we have, here in fact is some Fino barrels from Williams and Humbert, who have a very, very diverse collection of wines, quite an interesting selection to explore. And here is Paula Medina from Williams and Humbert. So we've had 3 women winemakers. There's a change in this generation, and they, I think each one of the women so far is doing very good things, and Paola particularly is thinking about all sorts of things like vintage wines and all sorts. So there's often something fun going on in her head. So let's maybe let me outline where the wine comes from. And as you can see, Anina and Carrascal. So now there's a trend really to name those vineyards. People always knew them, but maybe as consumers, we didn't ask those questions. Maybe, Burgundy vineyards have been telling us what their vineyards were for 500 years, but somehow it didn't happen in Jerez. And now it's super important to show that you have, these are famous names, as Pago Miraflores was before. It's fortified straight after fermentation. You select the right kind of more, I'm making it a more full-bodied wine, and that's the style that you want for Oloroso, and it's aged for over 12 years. So people sometimes say to me, oh, but sherry is, it's 19-20% alcohol. Well, no, it's not. If you're having Finos and Manzanillas sitting in the sunshine, it's a light wine. No more alcoholic than what you would be drinking now in, from around the world, red or white. This is a different case, and maybe you drink it slowly in a more different way, but the equilibrium is the same. So let's have Edward introduce the winery.
Hello, I'm Edward, and I'm at our Criaderas and Soleras of our Williams & Humbert collection 12-year-old Oloroso. As you can see, it's a very light and very dry Oloroso, and I would recommend it to have now, for example, with a meat barbecue, and serve very, very chilled. Cheers to everyone at the Big Fortified tasting.
Well, there's lots to say there, but particularly I want to say cheers to the Big Fortified tasting. So we every year, if you work in the wine trade, you have a great good fortune to go to a trade tasting where you get to taste the ports and sherries and Montilla-Moriles and fortified wines from around the world, and it's to help the wine trade decide what they're going to buy to sell to us as consumers. And it's a great event, but obviously this year it never happened. But the bonus was that instead of having a private trade event as the Big Fortified tasting for the wine trade, we as consumers have had, and some members of the wine trade also listening, have had a chance to have this tasting ourselves. And it's that's maybe one of the good things that's been coming out of this funny time, is the fact that we through video shorts have a chance to get inside the winery. We can't travel to Jerez perhaps yet, but soon enough we can, and really get a feeling of the wines. And I think this wine, this Oloroso, really gives me a feeling. It has that aroma of vanilla, of walnuts, of it's got chocolate mocha in there as well. It's something, when you're doing tasting notes, which from the 1st of August, I'll be doing for a month, we're doing the Decanter World Wine Awards. We have 17,000 wines to taste, which sadly we couldn't taste in April. They were going to be tasted in what is now a Nightingale Hospital, but was Excel. So now we're tasting them elsewhere. And when the sherry days come up, it's an absolute treat. The room is filled with this terrific aroma, and that people bring salted almonds and chocolate brownies just to balance up the wines. But this is superbly complex. I hope you'll agree, and I think it's something that you should be thinking about, definitely. As Edward says, it's obviously for barbecue, but it's for something with a wonderful meaty dish. And I also think that my friend Maria Jose, in an earlier picture, she roasted the chicken and used the Oloroso to flambe it. And I have roasted lamb. I quite often roast lamb if I'm extravagantly, in a bottle of Oloroso too, but the outcome is great. So I think this is one of those occasions I have done, and I'm sure many of you, for sherry lovers, have done, is I've used sherry instead of red wine with a meal. And people's first reaction is a little bit nervous. And then when they have it, it's absolutely, they understand just how it works. Possibly you could have this wine with a blue cheese. It's certainly, otherwise, if you wanted to, you could introduce it as a, sounds grand, a cheese course, but after a main course, or instead of a main course, cheese and Oloroso would be a great match. But the other thing that's interesting is I'm going to talk about wine temperatures in a minute, but here we have a suggestion that you should serve it a bit chilled, so as you wish. Now
Hello.
Oh, Imogen, forgive me. There we are. We're going to move on in the same town, in Jerez, but we're going to move on to another famous name, Lustau. And we're going to move on to Palo Cortado. So this is a really, how can I say, Palo Cortado is a cult wine, or a cult category. And that's because at the beginning, maybe, of its life, it was a thing that just was discovered in the winery, that maybe through a confluence of the particular vintage, and the nature of the grapes, the handling of them, something that had happened in the barrel, it turned out this way. Now, of course, winemakers understand what's happening in the vineyard and with their grapes, and they can select a wine to be Palo Cortado from the beginning. But you'll see on the bottle that above the words Palo Cortado Peninsula, there is a slash with a cross through it. That's the Palo is the almost vertical slash that the winemaker would make on the barrel to indicate that he'd found something that was out of line, and then the cross would confirm it. So Palo Cortado is, yes, definitely, it's very nice to have one to show tonight. And I did think about whether I was going to put it before or after the Oloroso, because it's intended to be a wine that's between that delicate refinement of Amontillado and then this full body of Oloroso. And well, you can see how you feel, but I think I wanted to show you the Oloroso first so that you could understand then the difference of Palo Cortado. Let's listen to Sergio as to, he's going to introduce the cellar where he is, the Imperatriz cellar, and then talk about, there we go. And then I'd also like you to think, at the end of his tape, you will see that the doors open onto another bodega, and it just shows you the connectivity and the extent of these cellars, the way they go one on for another.
The small solera of Palo Cortado Peninsula aged in Bodega La Emperatriz, built in 1848. It has 12 years of age and enjoys the full body of Oloroso in the mouth and the finesse of Amontillados on the nose. A unique wine to be drunk slightly chilled with savory and spicy food. Salud!
Yes, so you can see the extent of that cellar and how you can just keep on walking. And it's on a hot day, these cellars have a beautiful temperate temperature. And then you step outside, and in that corridor, before you get into the next cellar, it's very hot. Now it's interesting tasting this, but I do think this Palo Cortado would be very interesting with something spicy. As he says, I was just thinking, we had a Korean curry last night, which is quite hot, Korean pork curry, but actually it had a sweetness to it as well, which might be a nice contrast. I think you should think about pushing those kinds of boundaries. Let's get away from the European eating, European ingredients, and let's think about, you know, what's coming from Asia, what's coming from Singapore, what's coming with spice in it. I think, you know, this could be, you need the alcohol to balance that kind of spice. And this has definitely, now there's another way you're supposed to be able to spot Palo Cortado, because obviously I've been through the Master Wine exam system, and you have a blind tasting, and can you identify this is Palo Cortado? So one of the ways, yes, you can. I mean, it's definitely different from the Oloroso, but if you didn't have something to compare it with, one of the things you're supposed to be able to say is, well, it has a lactic buttery character. I'm not sure I know whether that is or not, but it certainly, to me, is, you can see that it's a wine with some age. It's got the alcohol you'd expect. It's got that very refined colour, and it's not heavyweight. It's a very nice choice for a warm day. I was just thinking, tomorrow the Tokyo Olympics would have been starting, and one could have sat back and watched the opening ceremony of Tokyo Olympics with a glass of the Palo Cortado and had great pleasure. So sadly, we will instead be continuing to something which I think will be even more memorable. In the meantime, I see that there was a question about tinajas, but I think, yes, Eric, you've answered that question, hopefully, and everybody's happy with it. Right, so here we are, we come to the end, now for something completely different. And I would just say, on your tasting mat, it says that it's PX 1990, but in fact what we've got is PX 1994, which is the next one in marketplace. And it is delightful that they have specially packaged this for us. But what it represents is something very typical of Antonio Sanchez, who's in the photograph here, who has a terrific museum. He's fascinated by the archaeology and history of the region, and you know, it therefore makes this place a lovely place to visit. He's always, in every photograph, dressed like the essential Andalusian gentleman. There's perhaps two people one can pick out there. There's Beltran Domecq, who's just retiring as the president of the Consejo Regulador, and there's Antonio Sanchez, who is so point de vue. And he's standing beside his, because more typically you would expect to find the wine that we're tasting in with one of those labels on the right. But on the left, I just wanted to show you this picture, which shows his range, or part of his range, because the second bottle in from the left is apparently in a light bulb. And it's a most delightful thing. It's Fino Electrico. So what happened was the winery took over a regional energy station, a regional electrical center, and people joked about it, the fact that it was giving the wine electricity or energy, and so it became Fino Electrico. But what was even nicer was that you actually can get it in a light bulb. I haven't seen it in the UK, but I hope that anyone who's on the commercial side listening here would bring Fino Electrico in, because it's in its light bulb, because I think it's great. So anyway, Antonio Sanchez, very important. I just had a question that before I go into our next page, the Palo Cortado. So there is that, I get a more restrained, a more elegant, understated note than I did on the nose than I did from the Oloroso, which really tells you, you know, I'm here, you know, take notice of me. I'm cocoa and walnut and vanilla. It has a number of those characteristics, but in a much more subtle way. And I think if you're eating food, quite often you don't want to have anything that's too aromatic. It's a bit like a Sauvignon Blanc that is just too dominant. Sometimes you want something more restrained. Then in the mouth, you have a number of the characteristics. You have a number of the characteristics which you would find in the Oloroso, but again more restrained, but particularly it has a freshness. And what's interesting about these wines is that as you get into the oxidative styles, they're older, 12 years, but more. And we just joyfully say, well, this wine's 12 years old, or it's 20 years old, or it's 30 years old. But actually they're fresh still. So what I think I get here is a fresh note with maybe there's a mouth-watering characteristic, which makes me think of, crunchy green apples. People will also talk about things like mahogany tables. Does it make you think a little bit about the smell of and taste, or imagined taste of great furniture? And then there's a creaminess to it. There's something about it which also says, do I feel this tastes a little bit like melted top quality vanilla ice cream? And then there's this lovely warmth at the end, and maybe even a possibility of red fruit. So I think quite often it's hard with sherries to find the word. It's just that next time you go back to it, you say, gosh, I recognize this, how good it is. But I think often having it with food will really help you unlock what you think it tastes of. So once you put it with a fine hard cheese, for instance, it will bring out the character brilliantly. But yes, I think food matching really helps in many cases, just as it does with let's say a tannic red wine, when all you can taste is the tannin. So we have a question here from Simon, and I actually haven't tasted this wine yet because I couldn't taste it before the tasting, because I knew that after this you can't go back. So I'll just taste it now. So what Pedro Jimenez like this gives you, and you can get from, you can get it to both in San Lucar and Jerez, but this particularly is so distinctive. This is probably, it's between 300 and 400 grams per litre of sugar. And so if you divide 300 by 5 grams, you get, it's about, 60 teaspoons of sugar in a litre. So we've got about a bit less than that here, but it's super intense. But what I would say is that it's also fresh. It's not a heavyweight. I mean, compared with some of the ones that you get that I have had in Jerez, they are quite weighty. But this has it has a sense of lemon juice in it, which lifts that sugar. So when you start, yes, golly, it's good. But maybe it's like having a barley sugar feeling, which has that sense of a dose of lime or lemon behind it. So yes, you've got the succulent wine, but it's great. And in a minute, I've got some dark chocolate here. But let's go back and let's go now to Antonio.
Yeah. This is Toro Bala Pedro Jimenez, the vintage 1994. This is my favorite wine on our collection of the wine. The wine is aged during 28 years approximately, and this gives the special smooth and the character of this wine. This is very perfect with a chocolate dessert, a dark chocolate with a blue cheese. This is fantastic wine from the DO Montilla-Moriles. Thank you.
Completely agree. And so you can see that bottle, which you can see in if you would purchase it again, would probably come with that label, is definitely something I've just had a piece of chocolate. Very good with chocolate, very good blue cheese. You need something big with it. The other thing that's interesting about it, and I've put here, is it's a single vintage wine, because actually a lot of the wines we've had here, I think all of them, every single one of them except this, have been through some kind of blending system, whereas this is a single vintage, and in a way that's much more challenging for the winemaker, because that's what you get. It means you don't necessarily get it every year, which you don't, but when you get it, golly, it's good. And indeed, for one of the wines in this range that they have, they got 100 Parker points. But there are trends happening in sherry too, where you will find single vintage wines being produced. But what's amazing is this extraordinary range of styles and categories. As I said, a style for every lifestyle. And if you want a sweet wine from Montilla-Moriles, golly, they can give it to you. But at the same time, they can give you a Fino from the same grape variety. So just to sum up then, before I start answering any more of your questions, how to serve this. And I found this little picture on a pavement. And it's essential, and I'm sure you're all using it, to use a tulip-shaped glass. Don't worry about getting a special glass. Don't put it in the smaller glass. These are not liqueurs. And because they have, as the question before, because they have such an aroma, you just want to be able to sit and smell them. So you don't need to put very much in the glass, but enough to be able to rotate it. And of course, when you rotate a PX, it goes like those orange screens you used to see in sort of Victorian gift shops, which were covering on the seaside, which were covering the windows so that the sunlight didn't get in. It absolutely stains the glass. Now, I had this information from the Consejo Regulador in Jerez, but I wouldn't necessarily follow it. So I would say, yes, serve Fino and Manzanilla. So the first three that we had, serve them chilled, and they'll give it back to you in spades. And as they warm up in the glass, then you'll see other characteristics coming. Now, they say that if you have one of these oxidative wines where the color has developed because the oxygen has come in contact with the wine, that there isn't any flaw, then serve them a bit warmer. They suggest 12 to 14, which seems relatively high to me. And then they say if you have an older wine, then you should have it even a bit warmer still, treat it more like a table wine. Now, what's interesting was actually that if you can remember back to our two representatives from wineries, they both said, serve this a little chilled. So you might want to think about going back to the Oloroso and the Palo Cortado and making sure that they're a bit chilled. And if it looks like the weather's going to be warm this weekend where you are, then definitely put them briefly in the fridge and see how it goes. And then definitely the guidance on the Consejo website was that PX wine should be served at, PX sweet wine should be served at sort of red wine temperature. But actually, I think for real enjoyment, because of that sweetness, I like them chilled. But of course, you can put them in cocktails. There's a very lovely cocktail that you can do with Montilla-Moriles and ginger ale. And equally, there are a whole range of New York barista cocktails that you can do with sherry. And I used to be really a purist about this, but actually thinking, well, this is sherry. You can't possibly do anything with, with Pedro Jimenez. It's absolutely not the thing. But actually, now I think these are great wines. And what's so interesting about them is that because they've got such intrinsic character, when you mix them with something else, the character still persists. So you can use a bit of sherry to give flavoring to things, and then you'll find that actually it enhances the whole drink. So I'm pro cocktails now, which maybe I never was before. So I will finish by saying yes, cocktails, and also a number of producers in this region are using their wines to make vermouth. And I think that's quite interesting. You start off with a very well-made sherry, and then you make vermouth. I mean, if you think about it, there are some quite famous wines. I guess Harvey's Bristol Cream comes into mind, which was a blend of all sorts of different sherries, and then that with a large ice cube and a lot of slice of orange again is very striking. So now let's think about some questions. So I have here, Natalia, can I repeat what to eat with wine number 2? Well, Natalia, I don't want to be too prescriptive about this because I genuinely think that you will find it. I think this is a great opportunity, like let's say this weekend, to get a whole array of things out. Now, if you're following the regulation about if it flies, if it runs, if it swims, then this is a wine for the swimmers. So, think about sushi, think about prawns. If you've got prawns, you could think about putting them in, with rice. But you can also, I actually think this wine has sufficient body because of the 6 years of age that you can have something spicy with it. But they have been having a lot of success with Fino and Manzanilla with Japanese food in Japan. Now, there are Japanese sherry sommeliers there. So I really, there's something to think about. I think that I wouldn't cheerfully put it with cheese. I think what you want to do with something that comes from San Luca like this is you want to think about the salt. So you want to have it with olives, with anchovies, with capers, any of those things which have come from the sea or have that saltiness. And golly, and the great thing about that is you either have it as an aperitif or you have it with a whole meal, and they will just get your mouth watering. But I've spent, as I know other people have on this webinar, I've spent many happy hours and days sitting out in the sun with a glass of this. And the good thing is that I'm sitting in London now, and the light is drawing in, but this will keep my sensation of sunlight alive, and that's super important. So Natalia, that's half an answer, but I think you'll find the answer yourself. There'll be something that will ching for you, but think about if it swims, and that might get you quite a long way. So Paul, why are these wines so undervalued and underpriced? Well, I hadn't mentioned the fact that they are so underpriced because it always makes the people from Sherry and Montilla frustrated, because very many people begin the presentation saying, well, the great thing about these wines is they're so cheap. And the other thing that people say, and I was outraged to see the other day, I hope you were too, in Saturday's Times, they had an article by a really very interesting, I think he's an English journalist who's living in Spain, who's been doing a series of really fascinating stories for the Times about what's happening in Spain. And he went down to Jerez, and I thought, oh, great, because we've got a whole page 3, 2/3 of it on Jerez and sherry. And it's the kind of main headline, the feature was that this was the wine that your granny would drink. And it's like, no, that happened years ago. And in fact, there are all sorts of interesting trends, and we've seen some here, but we have wines of great purity, great quality, great character. So I think there are structural reasons we can't really go into here for the how sherry lost its market. But I think what did come was, a big shake-up, as you know, in the last 5-10 years. And I think what's important about it is now that there are Spanish restaurants, Spanish specialist bars and independent wine shops open, that there's the understanding of Spanish culture, not as a kind of second poor relation to Italian pizza houses, that there is a joy in the great ingredients that we get from Spain and how they make such delicious food. So I think we're getting back to seeing it as a quality thing, because when I first started drinking sherry, which was really, a long time ago, last century, it was just natural that you should do so. I went to Cambridge University, and my tutor gave me, when I was reading out my essay to him, gave me a glass of sherry, which is quite an interesting thing to do with an 18-year-old. So it was the custom. That's changed. And what I love about it now is that we have, it's a much more open thing. People can choose what they want, how they want. And I guess take it while you can. Roger's question matches with this, which is sherry consumption still in decline? It's changing, Roger, it's really changing. So there was a time when sherry was crushed by the government had to expropriate a company which had owned far too many bodegas. It was a business with interests all over the place, and you suddenly discover that sherry was collapsing into the hands of very few corporate people, and it had a time when it was very much a corporate product, and now we're getting people coming out from what we're seeing here, producing the best of what they have in different characterful ways. So what we are noticing is that the Finos and Manzanillas, the first 2 and 3 that we have here are definitely establishing themselves, along with other white wines that people might drink. They're another great choice. The others are, which are really the jewels, you know, whether you're in Montilla-Moriles or you're in Jerez, are specialist wines, these wines with age. They maybe take a bit of understanding, but they're great food matching. But Roger, thank you for asking the question, because all of us need to go away and agree to drink more of them. So yes, Roger, use ice or in cocktails, definitely. I have no shame with using ice. It's the same. In those days when I used to go to the pub, and I'm hoping to go back next week, then ice in red wine or whatever. And then, yeah, Eric, you're recommending Sprite or 7-Up. And I think it's the mint and lime I like as well. But I think look into some of the American baristas, because they really are beginning to do, there's some good competitions there, and they're beginning to do really complex drinks. So Phil, can I comment on where these examples sit on the scale of sherries in terms of cost, quality? Well, I think the first two, so we have here Lagita and Barbadillo Solear, are very representative of their region. They'll be very well known because they're the ones that people will be buying half bottles of and glasses and taking to the spring fairs. They're all around, and you will see that these bodegas and some others produce bunting and all sorts of printed materials, which you see all over the towns and villages during the fairs. So you can see that you're either in a Solear event or you're in a Lagita sponsored event. They really add to the party feeling. And what's important about that is that always, you know, food has been served with it. It's just, I think, a British characteristic to drink and not to eat. But, you know, that's the important thing with these. Then it's, in terms of cost, I don't think any of these are going to cost you anything you worry about. I put the prices up, and I know I haven't got them here, but I haven't got, you know, you will spend so much more on practically anything else. Yeah. So then Chris, PX wines are so often associated with sweet wines. Is there a future for PX Fino Dry? Yes, absolutely. In fact, I can remember, it's another complicated story about Montilla-Moriles, which is so great to have the wines here today for you to show, is I used to drink a lot of Montilla-Moriles Fino. And it's now less available than it should be, because I think, you know, you taste this wine from Alvear, and there are other producers, they, you know, it's a lovely Fino, and, you know, as he said in the film, it's his flagship. So I think it's a question of our demanding it. For Montilla-Moriles and sherry really started at the you know, they both have an extremely long history in wine. We're talking centuries, and yet for some reason sherry has been able to make greater noise. Well, I guess there are more wineries, there are more people to make the noise, and so on. There's centuries of history there, but now I think is the chance to step out, and I think this tasting by the big Fortified tasting is really part of it. There was a big conference in Spain last year where we had a great meeting about the great wines of Andalusia, which in a way it's a secret needing to be told. We go on holiday to Andalusia, people go to Malaga, to Marbella, they go around to these lovely coasts, Atlantic coasts, but they don't drink it enough, which brings me to Jacob's question, which Jacob is saying, you know, I like the occasional glass of sherry, but I rarely drink through a half bottle. Well, in that case, well, I mean, the thing is that actually these things last longer than you think, Jacob. You know, that's what I love about a screw cap. They really, you know, you can just screw it up again and put it in the fridge, and you will be surprised how long these things last. And now, you know, if you talk to some producers, they'll say, well, you know, once you've opened it, you should drink it in 3 days, which I'm sure that, you know, some of us would be glad to do. But Jacob, I think you could keep it for quite a bit longer. I mean, I think the way you store it is the most important thing. And don't forget, if you have, any of these wines, and that includes the Finos and the Manzanillas, will last unopened. Can be cheerfully bottle aged. Obviously, the Oloroso, the oxidative styles, the browner styles, are extremely stable. They've had the exposure to oxygen and they're fine. So these are, in every case, I think, the smallest one you can get. I stand to be corrected by other people here who are selling it. You can look around, but I think definitely I'd keep that half bottle, and you'll be surprised. And don't forget, it does. If you've got halfway through it and now want to change to another half bottle, that half bottle will make you exceptional sourcing. Or it's we've always got to use at home in the kitchen. Eric, yes, it's worth commenting that Montilla-Moriles can't make sherry as its protected name in the same way champagne is. Many people put Montilla-Moriles in with sherry. Eric, that's absolutely correct. For instance, I remember when I was judging a few years back, I was chairing the Spanish panel for the Decanter World Wine Awards, and we found a Montilla-Moriles wine which we wanted to give a gold medal to. And the people classifying it, sort of backstage people who can't be experts in every category, had put it in with sherry. It's like, no, you can't judge these wines together, and they're not the same. This is a Montilla-Moriles and deserves its own gold medal in its own category. And I think Montilla-Moriles has, for all sorts of reasons, not been looked at carefully enough, and it's up to us now to ask for the double name. These are, this is a double named. There are only a few of them in Spain. There's Utiel Requena, it's the nearest one I can think of. But ask for Montilla-Moriles, not just for Montilla, and ask for it by name. I think I sound like an old advert there, but it's super important. Yes, sherry is a registered name, and I must say, I can certainly remember Cyprus sherry, South African sherry. I remember being in Australia when we had a tasting of what they used to call Fino, and they had to find another name for it. Is it Apero now? Well, I'm glad they did, because that's sherry and that's Montilla-Moriles, and nobody else can make it. And I think when you taste that PX from Montilla-Moriles, then you can see that. But also, and when you taste the Fino CB, that's interesting. This is a Fino for sure. I'd have to fight with myself a little bit to say, well, is it sherry or is it Montilla-Moriles? It maybe has a little bit more richness. That's finessing, but it's just a wine that gives a huge amount of pleasure. Question from Michael: what's my favorite style? It depends on the time of day, doesn't it? But I think that there's one that isn't here. Because we couldn't cover everything, and we wanted to give you that choice of Manzanillas, and that's an Amontillado. And maybe it's that compromise. It's that thing which has been a Fino, and at some point has got older and older and has become oxidative. The flora has died. It has a memory of its poetry. Here we are. This is the great thing about Sherry and Montilla. You can go into poetry. It has a memory of its ethereal past, and now it's becoming more full-bodied. And it's a terrifically good wine. So yeah, that's my I think is my definite answer. And on that, I think it's time to say now, over to you. You have these wines, and I hope you will. Well, you'll find several favourites. I think that really there are so many different styles here, and each one for a different time of the day. So thank you very much for your attention. And well, when you get to it, have a great weekend. But before I get there, I'd just like to thank Extenda, who are working on behalf of Andalusia, and particularly my colleagues at the Big Fortified Tasting, who've done a great job here and have brought us these lovely wines, and of course the bodegas who supplied them. Thank you.